Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to this remote meeting of the Planning Committee being held under the Local Authorities Coronavirus Meetings Wales Regulation 2020. It is not practicable for this meeting to be broadcast live. However, a recording of this meeting will be made available as soon as possible after the meeting has concluded. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. I have had no request for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. Can members please use the chat bar to indicate when you want to speak, and remember to keep your microphone muted when you are not talking. Right, moving on to the agenda. Agenda item 1, attendance and apologies. Geraint, do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've got apologies from councillors Ron Burnett and Emma Rapier.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Geraint, could you please ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they have any interest to declare?
No problem, thank you, Chair. If I can start with Councillor Ashley, please.
None.
I'm not sure if Polly wants to come in.
Chair, do you mind if I interrupt? Councillor Ashley, agenda item 5, we're dealing with the Full Circle House, Lakeside Park in Llantarnam. Cumbran Community Council have been consulted on that application.
I'm sorry, I didn't realise there was an agenda item 5. I'm very apologetic about that. I missed coming in meeting at that juncture. Yes, we obviously would have a declaration there, non-presidential.
Yeah, a personal non-prejudicial interest in agenda item 5 as a member of the Cumbran Community Council.
I haven't caught up with agenda item 5. Was that introduced? I'm sorry, I didn't know that.
It was introduced a couple of days, on this Thursday last week. It was added to the agenda, and members were circulated with that updated agenda.
I'm sorry, I haven't got that on there. I have to get online. I haven't had a notification of it and haven't caught up with it. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, perhaps you can look at your emails and when we're on item 5, just to bring you up to date.
I'm sorry, Chair. I've been caught up with a lot of other stuff at the moment.
Okay.
I do things like that occasionally. Sorry about that.
Right,
Okay.
Geraint.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Moving on to Councillor Bevan.
Yeah.
No, none.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Constance.
No interests.
Councillor Crick.
No interest, thank you.
It's Councillor Evans.
Not that I'm aware of. I didn't know there was an extra item, so I'll have to look on email.
Councillor Hawler.
No interest.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Is that Councillor James sending that message
Yeah.
in?
Yeah, I just had a message from her. I'm wondering if she's joined a different meeting, whether she's joined a previous meeting or something, because she's not actually in the participants for this meeting, but I've just had a message come through. I'm just going to check where that message has come from a sec.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, there's a different, she seems to be in a different version of planning committee.
Just happened to me, which is
We're just trying to get her into the correct meeting a sec, Chair. Are we okay to?
Yes, of course. Yes, bring her in, please.
Okay, thanks.
just happened to me before. Oh God, what's happened? Oh,
Chair, if it's okay, I'll carry on with the rest of the declarations of interest, and then hopefully Councillor James will be in the meeting and we can do hers at the end.
Right. Did you let Councillor O'Connell in? I noticed he was.
Yes, I'm here, Chair. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Geraint.
All right, cheers. I'll go on first of all to Councillor Jenkins, please.
Nothing.
Thank you. Councillor Fay Jones.
Yes, it would appear I have an interest in number 5, personal non-prejudicial. As a member of the Cwmbran Community Council, however, like Councillor Ashley, I wasn't totally sure it was on that today.
Yeah, I believe the agenda went out, and then the following day the item 5 was added, and members were informed via email, I think, and post, I believe.
I haven't had it on post, and I'm not sure. I've seen it on email.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm just looking. I can't find it.
No, neither of us have had it.
Okay. The email. I've been told the email went out on Wednesday, but.
Is it possible for it to be sent out again now quickly, or is that too much to do? You know, for these members to.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll arrange for one of the team to send it out whilst the rest of the meeting's going on, if that's okay, Chair.
That's fine. Thank you, Geraint.
Okay. Cheers. If I can move on to Councillor Janet Jones, please.
No interest.
Okay, thank you. Councillor O'Connell.
No interest.
Thank you. Councillor Parish.
Yes, I'd like to declare personal non-prejudicial interest in agenda item 4 as a member of Pontypool Community Council, which has been consulted on the application.
Thank you, Chair. And Councillor David Thomas.
Yes, thanks, Geraint. I got your email. So I'll be excluding myself from the meeting whilst consideration of agenda item 5 takes place. I do not intend to speak in my capacity as a member of this planning committee, and neither will I participate in the vote. The reason for this is because I have already made up my mind on agenda item 5.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thomas. Just going to double check now and see whether Councillor James, I believe she's in the meeting now. So if Councillor Gaynor James could confirm whether she's got any interest to declare, please.
Yes, Chris. I interest in number 4 as a member of Pontypool Community Council, and I did receive the email about the extra on the agenda. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Geraint. We move on to agenda item 3, minutes of the Planning Committee from the 17th of November 2020. Geraint, could I please ask you again to ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they agree that the minutes are a true and accurate record of the meeting.
No problem at all. Thank you, Chair. If I can start with Councillor Ashley, please.
Agreed.
Councillor Bevan.
Agreed.
Councillor Constance.
Agreed.
Councillor Crick.
Agreed.
Councillor Evans.
Agreed.
Councillor Hawler.
Agreed.
Councillor James.
Agree.
Councillor Jenkins.
Agreed.
Councillor Fay Jones.
Agreed.
Councillor Janet Jones.
Agree.
Councillor O'Connell.
Agreed.
Councillor Parish.
Agreed.
And Councillor Thomas.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you, Geraint. We'll move on to agenda item 4, planning application 20/P/0496 FUL, and its proposed residential development comprising of 14 houses and 19 apartments, access, parking, hard and soft landscaping and ancillary works at land at Pennyway Lane, Tranche, Pontypool. Can I ask Claire Hall, Senior Planner, to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members and guests to today's meeting. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yes, I can see it.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so the application site is an area of approximately 1 hectare in size, located on Pennywayne Lane. You'll see from the report, the site's got quite a lot of planning history. The most recent is a scheme for 41 residential units, which is this one here, which was approved in 2016. That permission remains alive and is subject to a Section 106 agreement as set out in the report. This is the current scheme layout, which is for 33 units, but it follows a similar sort of layout in terms of the topography of the site, because it's very steeply sloping. So in terms of construction, the sort of middle section is really the logical place on which to build. These are some typical streetscape elevations that have been provided to show how the site would look compared to adjacent properties. So these are the properties in Bushy Terrace, and these are the existing properties on Pennywayne Lane here and Avalon Place here, with the development on the east side facing Pennywayne Lane here, and that's it facing westwards, and this is the east facing part of the site that is on the western edge of the layout. So it's two rows of development, houses on one side and predominantly flats on the other. Again, the levels are significant on this site, so we have had some sections provided to show how the various roof points would sit within that topography. There will be an element of cutting involved to create some level surface and for some usable amenity space to serve the properties, particularly the ones on the western side. So this is the existing footpath. This is the northern boundary of the site. This is Pennywayne Lane here, and this is looking up the road back towards Tranche FC. As you can see, the sort of Pennywayne Lane frontage is quite heavily landscaped. The trees, some of which are protected by a preservation order. So again, this is looking back in the other direction. This is the properties on Avalon Place, and this is the entrance into the site, to the landscaped undeveloped section. This is what the site currently looks like. Unfortunately, there has been some fly tipping incidences on there, you can see from the photographs, and the site has sort of through neglect really sort of been sort of reclaimed by nature, I suppose is the best way to put it. So this is the best shot really to show how it fits. So this is the site here. Okay, this is the entrance into Avalon Place. So these properties here are existing, part of a wider scheme that wasn't finished on this remainder site. This is Bushy Terrace. These are the existing properties on Pennywayne Lane. So the development in the layout plan has 2 rows of dwellings, one on this side and one on this side, with landscaping and tree buffers along the Pennywayne Lane frontage. This is Tranche Football Club. This is Pontypool Rugby Club, and that is the context for which some of the comments have been received in terms of parking on Pennywayne Lane, for example. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Claire. Right, I'd like to bring in the first of the third-party speakers, Miss Olivia Roberts. Miss Roberts, you have 5 minutes to address the committee, and you will be timed by Geraint.
That's lovely. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, yes.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you for welcoming me to the meeting today to discuss this very important matter of the planning proposal for the land off Pennywayne Lane. As you said, my name is Olivia and I live at New Haven on Pennywayne Road, so along the northern boundary of the proposed site. Now, I strongly object to this planning application on privacy, well-being and safety grounds. And despite minor amendments to the initial plans, my objections, they remain considerable. Now, I have major concerns about the inadequacy of parking and highway safety surrounding the proposed site. Penny Wain Lane simply cannot cope with the current parking demands, and as I'm sure many of you are already aware of this existing problem, further dense housing development will only exacerbate this problem. Now, the amended plans merely meet the minimum requirements for residents, but I feel they fail to provide enough visitor parking or take account of the fact that there quite often are multiple drivers per room. For example, in a one-bedroom property, there can be 2 adults who can both drive, and there are not adequate parking provisions for this as the plans stand. The developers on the initial plans even went as far as to say that residents and visitors could park on the main highway, so near the busy T junction and a primary school. Now, this is only going to increase danger to pedestrians and particularly school children and other motorists, and I feel this is simply reckless and would be irresponsible. And sadly, as the council is aware, there has already been a road fatality in very close proximity to this proposed development, which occurred just metres away from my house. And I believe that further additional traffic makes a repeat of this tragedy even more likely. I also have tremendous concerns that any financial contribution that's being proposed by the developers may sway opinion regarding road safety. Now, due to the narrow and steep topography of Penny Wain Lane, any minor layout changes or slowing measures that the developers may contribute towards, I feel would do very little to mitigate the existing road safety concerns, which would then be compounded by this development. Slower measures may even sort of exacerbate congestion at peak times, forcing drivers to pull out and take risks on this road with numerous blind bends and parked cars. Any proposed traffic calming measures simply just cannot combat the reality that this current infrastructure is ill-suited to the density of traffic this development would impose on an already extremely busy and dangerous road. Now, my next point is regarding visual amenity, because the information presented thus far from the developers suggests that the potential estate would be in keeping with the semi-detached nature of my property and the houses in the local vicinity. The planning application, however, suggests sets of 3-storey flats to the front of the development, and no attempt has been made on these revised plans to remedy this. The development remains totally out of keeping with the area, as there are no 3-storey flats in the surrounding neighbourhood. And I'm quite certain that any existing resident who requested to add an entire an extra story to their property would likely be rejected during the planning application for this precise reason. Then it brings me on to a more personal note. So the 3-storey flats having windows close to our boundary overlooking our garden, bringing about a real invasion of privacy is obviously a concern. The new plan suggests there's a wider buffer being included along the northern boundary, but it's simply so negligible that it feels unreasonable for the planners to even class this as an alteration that's beneficial. It certainly does little to address our concerns. And then the plans also now include a new footpath that links the estate to the public footpath which runs right along the boundary of my property. This will undoubtedly increase footfall across this route, and the inclusion of this path in conjunction with the lack of on-site parking provision will also encourage residents of the estate to park on the already overcrowded Penny Wain Lane and use this path as a shortcut to their property. Of course they will, but also add into our loss of privacy and security. Now, I realise there are time constraints in place when I'm making this representation to the planning committee today. So I've only focused on a number of sort of core concerns. However, my full comments also outline a number of objections that are yet to be addressed by the planners, and I would ask you to please read my written planning objection in full to understand the entirety of my concerns. I have the firm opinion that there are many valid safety reasons why the community of Wainfelling would be massively disadvantaged by this development of the land in question, and I urge you to reject the planning proposal, having taken these points into account today. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Ms Roberts. I'd now like to invite the second speaker, Councillor Mike Jeremiah, Ward Member. Councillor Jeremiah, you two have 5 minutes to address the committee, and Geraint will time you.
Thank you, Chair. we've had many problems over many years with Pennywayne Lane and Pennywayne Road. We've had cars in collision. We've had wing mirrors broken off with cars trying to pass each other. And about 16 months ago, we had a 22-year-old man die and another seriously injured. I then asked the leader of the council and deputy leader of the council and Steve Jarrett on highways to have a site meeting, which we talked about moving the cars off Pennywayne Road to the back of the houses to put a lane in, and the residents would put hard standings in to take their cars off the road. We then talked about better signage. We talked about speed ramps and the level of the road, because we got a bit of a hill going from Pennywayne Lane to Pennywayne Road. We talked about trying to flatten our road up a little bit. None of these things has been done at all in 14 months. I've spoken to the deputy leader a couple of times. And I know a lady called, a resident called Leanne has been on the back of Steve Jarrett every week since this happened, and she's just been fobbed off. The new application, there are 2 primary schools en route to Pennywayne Lane and Pennywayne Road. 3 junctions on the lane: Avalon Court, Avalon Place, and where the school, where the Padropian school is, Conway Road. The Avalon Court and Avalon Place entrances, junctions, are not 10 yards apart on either side of the road. And in the middle of that, there's a bus stop. I find that very, is a very dangerous, with the extra traffic, very dangerous for the road. There's no room on the site, going to the planning application, there's no room on the site for play equipment. So they have suggested that they move the play equipment over to the Tranche AFC football pitch, where the road is a very busy road, and children from that site and people will have to cross over the road to go to the, and I find it unbelievable that they can't find room for the play equipment on the site. We've major problems with parking, as the last lady has already said. I would like to know, I understand that money from the developers, some say 20,000, some say 50,000, for improvements on the road. We don't know what improvements they're going to make, because we haven't been told, and I don't think they know either. But I don't think it'll be a lot, because 50,000 don't go far on highways, and there's a lot of work to be done on the site, on the roads. I would ask that we improve the road first, and make sure that the people and the residents that are aware of what improvements have been made and agreed with what improvements have been made. And I asked the road plan is done before, I don't know what the decision is going to be, but I would ask for the road plan to be done before the actual work on the housing starts. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Now I'd like to invite the last of the speakers, Miss Rhiannon Lees. Miss Lees. You also have 5 minutes and you will be timed by Geraint. And Miss Lees, I believe you are the agent.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Firstly, many thanks for the opportunity to address the committee. My name is Rhian Lees and I'm an Associate Director with RPS, acting as an agent for the applicant Bluefield Land. Firstly, I'd like to thank officers for the proactive and positive manner in which they've dealt with this application and allowed us to achieve the positive recommendation before you now. The principle of residential development on this site has, as the officer report points out, been established for a number of years, and there remains 2 consents that could still be implemented. The application site presents some clear design challenges, not least the topography, but through ongoing and open dialogue with officers from all relevant sections within the council, we've managed to achieve a scheme which is both viable and, most importantly, deliverable. The scheme will provide 33 much needed affordable homes and will be delivered in partnership with Mellin Homes, who have a strong track record of affordable housing delivery in Torfaen. The scheme has already been through a detailed technical scrutiny process with Welsh Government, and subject to receiving planning permission, housing grant funds will be released and Bluefield Land can be on site by spring 2021 to begin construction. Notwithstanding, I note there have been a number of third-party objections to the scheme, and I would like to address the points raised by the local ward member and local residents. With regard to highway safety, it's important to note that it's the professional view of the Council's highways officer that the scheme is wholly acceptable in highway safety terms. The layout of the site provides parking in line with the Council's own adopted standards, and given the significant body of evidence to support lower car ownership levels amongst housing association residents, the level of parking is perhaps even an over-provision. To pick up on comments made by Miss Roberts, the application has never proposed that parking can occur on Pennywine Lane, and the proposed footpath link between the site and Bushy Park is a direct response to a request by officers from the Council. Fears that overspill parking will occur on Pennywine Lane are unfounded, and I would just reiterate the fact that the site has an extant consent for 41 units that could still be implemented, plus another for 29. In highway terms, the principle of developing the site for residential development is firmly established. My client has also agreed to a Section 106 contribution of £20,000 towards traffic calming measures on Pennywine Lane. This is in line with the proposed contribution from the previously consented scheme. Councillor Jeremiah requested details of exactly what these measures will propose, and the detail of that will be agreed in further discussion with highways officers. The application complies with all relevant highway-related policies of the Local Development Plan and Supplementary Planning Guidance, and I do not consider any refusal on highway safety grounds could be justified. Turning to the design of the scheme, concerns have been raised about the inclusion of 3-storey apartments. The apartments will be set back some distance from Pennywine Lane, and due to the topography and design, will not actually present as a solid 3-storey building. The upper 2 floors are set back from the lower ground floor. The apartments will also be buffered from the adjacent dwelling at number 28 Pennywine Lane by existing and proposed landscaping, ensuring no detriment to residential amenity by way of overbearing or impact on existing levels of privacy. It's also important to note that there are no windows in the side elevation of the apartment block closest to the northern boundary, which is the concern. In respect of ecology, the site has been subject to evaluation by 3 separate independent ecologists over the last 4 years, and all have found the site had limited ecological value. All applications in Wales must now provide biodiversity net gain, and the measures proposed, which include bat and bird nesting boxes, a comprehensive landscaping scheme, and further reptile survey work, demonstrate the level of net gain that the scheme will deliver. The Council's professional ecology officers are satisfied that the scheme will not result in any detriment to ecological and biodiversity interests. The scheme will also provide, in addition to the £20,000 for highway safety improvements, over £68,000 in Section 106 monies to improve existing local children's and adult recreation facilities in the vicinity of the site. Given the importance of good quality outside space in the world we currently find ourselves in, this is a substantial contribution that should be welcomed. Overall, I'm really pleased to note the recommendation to grant planning permission for a scheme that will make a significant contribution to affordable housing delivery in Torfaen. I appreciate the open and positive stance taken by officers to date, and I hope you can support their recommendation and approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lees. Can I ask Claire if you would like to comment on any of the remarks made by the speakers?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points, really. Firstly, in terms of Ms Roberts, obviously her objections are summarised in the report, and our views of that are explained. I do have to pick up, though, in terms two points that the lady made. Firstly, in terms of there being inadequate infrastructure from a highways point of view to support the scheme, I would draw members' attention specifically to the background section of the report on page 20, going into page 21. The planning history on this site is significant. I think for the best part of 20 years, it's been claimed that this site should not be developed because of highway capacity grounds. And as you'll see from the background section, that was quite robustly dismissed by originally an appeal inspector way back when, and obviously subsequently schemes have all been approved. And significantly, from the consideration of this application, there is already a planning permission in place for 41 units, which will obviously generate more traffic and parking demand than the current scheme. And the second point I must pick up on is because the lady said that there are no 3-storey flats development in the local area. That's actually not true. There's not any along Pennyway Lane, but if I can just share my screen quickly, in terms of just around the corner in in Conway Road. If I can just bear with me a second. I'm just trying to share this screen. It's not working at the moment. Bear with me. Sorry, I have got a picture open, but I'm not able to share it for some reason. But if I can go back to there on the map, it's actually here, okay, on Conway Road. I have got an elevation photo that I'm not able to share for some reason, but there are 3-storey flats development on Conway Road here. So this is the application site. So there are no 3 stories along here, but it's not actually true to say that there are no 3-storey developments in the local area. Okay, and in terms of Councillor Jeremiah's comments, I go back and unshare my screen. Okay, I have to pick up on there is no requirement for an equipped area of play on this site. The council's adopted supplementary planning guidance sets out thresholds for development and what's expected to be provided. So a development of this size is expected to provide an area of local play, but not equipped play. They are different beasts, really, from a planning point of view. The previous scheme did propose a small area of local play on the Pennyway Lane frontage, which, given Councillor Jeremiah's concerns about having children playing in close proximity to the road, I think would suggest that this offer to upgrade the existing one that's already in place further along Pennyway Lane, rather than introduce a new one, is probably a sensible approach, and from an officer's point of view complies with the SBG, because it's offering an enhanced contribution in that area in lieu of providing it on site itself. Other than that, I think everything's set out in the report. Obviously, I don't know whether the highways officer wants or needs to come in.
Would the highways officer like to come in at this point?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. Just picking up, just to reiterate what Claire said about the planning history of this site, just to make members aware that there have been previous applications for substantial residential development on this site, and there are previous inspectors' decision. Just turning to Olivia Roberts and the comments made by Olivia about safety and parking provision on the site. Parking provision is in accordance with the Council's supplementary planning guidance and parking standards. What we normally do is we split between residential parking and visitor parking. It meets the standards for both, and we do allow residential parking on street within the development. So we've assessed it, and there should be no parking on Penwyn Lane or Penwyn Road. It's all contained within the site. Turning to safety along the frontage of the site, yeah, tragically, there was an accident recently, and tragic though it may be, we have to consider the long-term accident record along the development site, and there is no substantial personal injury accident record along the site, although I do say that I highlight that tragic accident that occurred. There is, within the old section 106 for the development, there is a contribution for traffic calming, but what we haven't done is done any detailed work on what that might be. And I would welcome further discussions, probably with the local member, should this scheme progress. Other than that, I have nothing else to add. Well, one thing probably to take into account is that when sites are development, it's awful difficult to try to fix all of the ills that are on the highway network. I mean, I long-standing issues within the borough, parking on existing streets, terraced houses. You know, it's endemic throughout the borough. But what we as highway officers have to look at is what benefit can we get as a consequence of any development, and would existing ills on the highway network mean that we have to oppose development, particularly given that there's long-standing consents for development on this site in any event. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. I think there are 3 speakers. Jason O'Connell first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just start by saying how well the opposing resident spoke there? I can understand the frustration, I really can. But it appears to me on the face of it that the agent and certainly our planning department have done a pretty watertight job mitigating a lot of the concerns as far as I can see as it comes to highways and so on. So I'm struggling to find a reason to reject it, if you like. And I think one of the areas that does strike me as being open is the fact that nobody likes the feeling of being overlooked in their property, and I can understand that. The question I have for the planning department is, what right do residents have when it comes to planning and development such that residents aren't overlooked? Do they have any recourse, and would that be a reason for refusal in this case?
Right, Claire, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, the overlooking right to privacy is pretty much one of the cornerstones of planning, really. It is certainly the remit of this committee to be looking at that aspect. What I would say is, in terms of notwithstanding the third party speakers' views, we obviously have to look at it in terms of its actual impact as opposed possibly to perceived impact. Okay, so we have a landscaped buffer along a public footpath that is already there. Okay, and we have a development that is built with no windows overlooking the direction of the property. Now, going from having a site next to you with no buildings on it to having a new development, especially one that is to all intents and purposes 3-storey, notwithstanding the description that the agents explain about how that would be read in visual terms, I can understand that. You go from there's nobody next door to you to suddenly there are people in flats. So I'm not diminishing that viewpoint at all. However, it does come back to the hard and fast facts from a planning point of view, and we have to look at things that are on the ground. We have a sufficient separation distance. We have no windows overlooking that direction. We have an existing public footpath between the site and the property concerned, and landscaping trees along that buffer to again maintain that separation, so there's no direct overlooking, even if there were windows in that elevation, which there aren't.
Thank you, Claire. Jason, are you okay?
perception of being overlooked rather than actual overlooking. Is that what you're saying? I mean, I'm struggling because the borough is in desperate need of social housing, and this, on the face of it, is a good development. But obviously, we don't want to put the residents' rights at risk. So, if it's a perception of being overlooked, then maybe that can be mitigated. I don't know.
Yeah, well, just on that point, I think, you know, we've been well aware that the closest point really is the dwelling on that northern boundary in terms of the proximity to the development, and that's why the amended scheme did introduce that wider buffer along there to ensure that the existing trees can be retained and or sort of beefed out really to mitigate any perceived harm that there is. And I think we have to be satisfied that there are sufficient distances between properties, no direct lines of sight overlooking that sort of thing. So I'm not going to say that there's no impact, but what I am going to say is that not impact is not sufficiently harmful for us to conclude that this scheme should not go ahead.
Right. Thank you, Claire. Jason, are you okay with that? No answer. Ms. Roberts, I can see you've put your hand up, but I cannot allow you to speak again. You've had your 5 minutes, so I'm sorry you cannot be brought into this discussion. Hugh Bevan, you are next on the...
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I got quite a few things actually. On the face of it, as already been said by others, we would wish to encourage more affordable housing coming into the borough, and the fact that this is a development coming in from Melin as well. But I do have, having read through the report, quite a number of comments and questions. I wanted to ask Claire, firstly, about the confidence issue. We've had 20 years worth of planning applications on this particular site. It's gone through so many different guises, from housing, residential development, to nursing homes, care homes, then residential changes, and now we're talking about 3-story flats. What degree of confidence do we have that this application is actually going to be taken forward and seen to fruition, given it's been brought to planning so many times over the last 20 years in many different guises, and there's already an existing planning application that's been given consent that hasn't been pursued? So why now in this guise? Why in a different format? I take on the board the comment that the agent is saying that, oh, it should be encouraged because it's a lesser number of units in terms of residential units than what was previously given permission for. But for me, that doesn't seem to mitigate the concerns that have already been raised by parking and parking for residents and visitors. I take a slight issue with the highways officer as well, existing infrastructure up in the valleys with being terraced housing, and it shouldn't be a reason to oppose a new development. Well, I take an issue with that because you have to look at the existing infrastructure. And I think what we should be focusing on is not in terms of using that as a reason to oppose any new development necessarily, but oppose it where it is. But the appropriateness is the word that we should be looking at in terms of the appropriateness of any new development that's going to go into a site where there's already known highway network infrastructure issues that are already reported. And it's the appropriateness of the planning application that we should be looking at. That's argument is somewhat compromised by the fact there's already an existing application in there for a higher number of developments than the applicant is now looking to put in there. So I want to go back and refer other members of the planning committee to other paragraphs on the report. On page 47, under the drainage section, it clearly states that Torvine's drainage officer is not satisfied that the current proposals are sufficient and elements of the proposed SUDS design will need to be revised. Now, members will recall, prior to when we had the coronavirus pandemic, we had significant rainfall. We've had flooding to various properties within the borough. So I do have a concern over the fact that the drainage officer has raised those concerns. There's also, I do feel the issue over highways hasn't been fully addressed, even with taking into account the 3K contribution. And on page 46 of the report, it actually states that the developer has offered a financial contribution of £20,000, and then it goes on to say in the same sentence, with the potential for a significantly enhanced offer depending upon the position that the council wishes to take. So can I ask, please, whether council officers have explored the possibility of exactly what this significantly enhanced offer would be, and why is the significantly enhanced offer not included in a report to address the highway issues? And furthermore, I think finally, trying to find the relevant page, there was one more point I picked up on. Oh yes, with regards to privacy issues, the hedgerow, the ecology and landscaping officer was saying that there should have been a suitable 15-metre buffer to reduce the potential risk to damage to the habitat and wildlife. As it stands, the document proposes a protection radius of retained trees of less than 10 metres and less than 2 metres in some areas. So why are we not insisting on supporting our own landscape and ecology officer of the retention of that 15-metre buffer? And that was the points that I wished to raise. Thank you.
Claire, would you like to come in first, and then perhaps Paul Highway after? Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. It's just, well, I've got a lot of paper to write down today, councillors. Thanks for all those questions. I'll try and make sure I take them all in turn. I think point one was on the confidence of it being taken forward, given the history of previous schemes not coming forward. Unfortunately, I'm not in the best position to answer that. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to developers' costs and deliverability. Developers obtain planning permission and sell on for all various reasons. And for whatever reason, the previous schemes that we've approved have not come to fruition. I think the site is difficult from a topography point of view, so that does lead to a lot of construction costs in terms of being able to build on the site. However, what I would say is, just based on this current application, if based only on the sort of timing pressure that Welsh Government have already signed off on this from a funding point of view, Melin are keen to go and are subject to a timetable to be able to draw down that funding to deliver the scheme. I think maybe unlike previous schemes, which may have been more for enhanced sort of value and moving things on point of view, this does look like it's realistically going to be delivered. And I know our housing officer has also been party to those discussions in terms of actual construction and deliverability of those much needed affordable housing units. That's the best I can do. I'm not a developer. Ultimately, they decide which ones put the spade in the ground and which ones don't. In terms of point two, you talked about taking issue with the parking and the comments that the highways officer has said on the suitability of the infrastructure. You talked about the appropriateness of developing the site in that context. It is true that you could potentially wipe out most of the northern part of the borough for development point of view if you don't accept that the highway conditions are somewhat constrained due to the the topography of and the nature of the landscape on which we've been asked to build. But the mechanism for that is the local plan. Okay, so if you allocate land for development by including it in an urban boundary and not excluding it for development, that is the mechanism. So if you think an area of the borough, be it on a ward level or wider than that, is not suitable for future development because of inadequate infrastructure, the mechanism for doing that and the appropriate mechanism for doing that is the LDP. So you would be looking to influence allocations. We're currently out to consultation on the replacement LDP as to where sites should and shouldn't be built on. That is the tool for addressing concerns as to where development should and shouldn't happen. Ultimately, from a planning applications point of view, section 38(6) says that development must be in accordance with the development plan. This is a site that is within the urban boundary that is allocated. It's not specifically allocated, but it's not excluded from development within the urban boundary. And the significant planning history is a material consideration that we can't ignore, especially as you say, there's an existing scheme that have got higher number of units than the one currently before you. On point 3, you referred to the drainage officer's concerns on page 47. Yes, I think the drainage scheme is not completely to his satisfaction. However, from a planning point of view, we have to be reasonably satisfied that the layout complies with the separate requirement for surface water approval, which is subject to a separate mechanism in itself. There's a very detailed and worked up sustainable drainage scheme for this site, which again, coming back to point 1 on confidence, was never worked up on the previous scheme. Okay, and the previous scheme wouldn't have a requirement for sustainable drainage in the same way as the current scheme was, because it was approved prior to the new sustainable drainage regulations coming into place. So actually there's an option, this current scheme gives you the luxury of having a more up-to-date and sense compliant drainage arrangement than the previous extant approval, which wouldn't be caught by the same regulations. Okay, I think the drainage officers highlighted what the concerns are. It does relate, again, coming back to the topography and the rate of runoff, but we're confident that, subject to some tweaks to the sustainable strategy, that it won't change from a planning point of view, and the detail would then be fleshed out in consultation with the drainage bodies. Okay. Point 4, you referred to the enhanced section 106 offer on page 46. What is it? Why is it not in the report? I think this comes back to we're looking at the site from a purely supplementary planning guidance compliance point of view. There is a requirement for the scheme to provide so much for children's play, so much for adult recreation, so much for highway improvement, so much for affordable housing, etc., etc. There is a reference, if you look in the report, our page 48, that when I talk about an enhanced offer, it would be, from the developer's point of view, they know the level of contribution they're expected to make, and they've agreed to that, which complies with the supplementary planning guidance. It really is a matter for the council then, how they allocate those funds. Every section of the council wants its own little bit of funding, but what it does raise in the report is that the possibility, if members felt that it really was the highways infrastructure and the traffic calming that was the most important element here, then I'll defer to Polly's view on this, but I'm sure that the recommendation and the heads of terms could be tailored so that the cake could be sliced up differently, so that more was given to that element than, say, for example, the adult recreation. The children's play, again, and the adult recreation destination is pretty much the same site. So it's how many ways you slice the same cake. From the developer's point of view, it makes no difference to them. The contribution they make is unchanged. It comes down to council priorities at the end of the day for that expenditure. From a planning point of view, we have to be satisfied that a scheme is compliant with our SPG in terms of obligations, which this scheme does. Okay, that's point 4. On point 5, you're asking why we're not supporting the landscape officer on a 15-metre buffer for privacy and landscape reasons. the honest answer to that is because it's not justified in this location. Okay, 15-metre buffer is set out in PPW 10 for protection of ancient woodlands primarily, but you know, woodlands generally. This is not a woodland. This is a site with trees and hedgerows along the boundary, and it's within the urban boundary with an extant planning permission. You know, it's not reasonable or necessary to insist on a 15-metre buffer because there really is no policy basis for doing that. So I think you probably get the gist from the report that the landscape officer is not completely happy with this, but I think from a planning point of view we have to balance all the considerations, and if this was a greenfield site, a woodland area, we would be holding out for a 15-metre buffer in accordance with planning policy 10, but that is not what this is. This is an urban site with planning permission, and we've tried to balance so we've got at least sufficient distance so that the trees can be retained to maintain that buffer and those sort of green corridors around the site, which are so important. Thank you. I hope I've covered everything.
Yeah, thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Claire. Paul, would you like to come in now with the highway issues?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to say that I really support what Claire has just said regarding highway issues, the local development plan and section 106 contributions. With regard to appropriateness of this site, from a technical standpoint, we take into account a number of issues when looking at the development site, and this is always followed through. If we oppose something, we have to prove certain aspects of highway development control to its planning inspectorate. So what we always look at the capacity of the road, whether the existing road can, in theory, take the amount of traffic that this development would contribute to the existing highway network. So what we look at the existing road, the existing infrastructure. Can it cope with what traffic levels are already there? And can it then cope with any additional traffic associated with this development? The viewpoint we came to with this development site in the first instance is in the existing LDP. We then looked to say, well, could we get any contributions as a consequence of this development to treat local inadequacies on the highway network? Can the highway front in this site cope with the existing traffic that's there? Yes, it's well within its capacity, notwithstanding that there are local issues. We then look at the accident record fronting the development site, and as I mentioned earlier, yes, there was a tragic incident there a while ago. But overall, the long-term personal injury accident record along the frontage of the site is not significant, and we look at those aspects on all sites. And what we also look at is, are there any improvements that we could carry out as a consequence of this development that are justified? So yeah, we always look at the appropriateness of a development site, and I got to agree with Claire again, is that what Claire said was about we would take out the whole of the north of the borough for any development whatsoever, if we sort of took the view that everything is so substandard. Well, it isn't. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul.
I think
who would you want to
Chair
come
Lance,
up?
having heard the officers' representations, in spite of the concerns that I've raised, I think given the history on this particular site, that there's already an existent application that's been granted permission for a higher number of developments, and that there have been changes in legislation that have been reflected in the revised application for the SUD. In spite of my concerns that I've raised, I think the fact that if this was a clean site with no prior application, I would probably be more minded to reject it. Given it's there, in spite of the concerns I raised, I think on balance, I'm going to support the officers' recommendations and approve. But thank you,
Right, thank you
for your extensive answers on the questions.
Right, thank you, Hugh. Janet, you are next.
Thank you, Chair. Hugh has asked nearly all the questions I wanted to raise, but I am concerned about the landscaping and the ecology, and want some mitigation for the loss of the existing habitat on this site. And also, I am really concerned about the traffic and the parking issues. Yes, they have been addressed, but I've got major concerns and major worries about this, Chair.
Well, you have heard what the officers have to say and what Hugh has just said. I don't know whether you want to come in again, Claire.
Well, I just think obviously on the ecology, maybe we haven't covered that. But in terms of mitigation, there are two elements, as members are aware, in terms of Planning Policy Wales now, we're looking at mitigation and enhancements. There's two elements to it. Again, from an ecological point of view, I think the one thing that remains unknown, I suppose, is the reptile and the extent of reptile mitigation that's required. However, the developer is aware of the need for additional survey work in this area to specifically identify the carrying capacity for this site. The previous scheme also requires further reptile surveys to be undertaken, but of course the previous scheme wasn't subject to the enhancement requirement that the current scheme is. So again, going back to the 2016 permission will mitigate but won't enhance. The current application seeks to do both, and from an ecological point of view, subject to that further work on the reptile area, which is subject to a suggested condition specifically for that one species, the scheme's satisfactory from an ecological point of view.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you. Stuart, Ashley, I've got you next on the list.
Hugh Bevan's rather picked most of us on this. Thank you, Hugh. He's not smiling at all. But the situation is that there are certain aspects of landscape and ecology which I have questions about, which haven't been mentioned. Claire, are you there? The situation is ash dieback is one of them, and having a look around the borough at the moment, I'm on the biodiversity committee, and it's getting bad now. I'm noting this, that you've got it up there. Have a look around where I am. It's appalling. So in terms of stuff that you've got up there already, you're going to have to look at replacing it. You can't get away with it. That's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect, I totally agree with you about 15 meters, which is something is considerable distance. I can understand, because you've got vertical distance going in on this as well. So I understand why you're reluctant to look at a 15-meter barrier. I understand that in an urban context, and I agree with you on that. Because in that site, it'll be half your site away from doing. But in terms of what the landscape officer and the ecologist say, I understand the ecology there. The problem you've got is, and I've noticed there's quite a lot of stuff talked about native species and non-native replanting. That does concern me, because I did actually look up what they were talking about, which was ground cover, and it's not very light. Hence the reason I was talking about biodiversity. Idea of if we could please have natives planted back in there rather than landscape type stuff that housing associations rather like, because they're cheap and they go in there. That was a problem. We've had that elsewhere in the borough, and putting in non-native plants is not the stuff that our biodiversity champions like very much, because they are a problem. Certainly these landscaping plants, there's a lot of stuff like that, which sounds like detail, but when you have it in there in mass, it's not detail, it's actually quite important. And as for SUDS, the other part of SUDS is actually the ecology, because the ecology works as part of the SUDS sets, right? Don't you give? I'm sure you've got officers there to give me. I've been to quite a few bits of stuff on this. I'm not an expert on it, but I understand that the grass and the trees and the rest of it work as part. And the other part of this buffering system, with the trees is Steve Williams will give us a lecture on this, is mycelium, because with the trees and ecology is all that in there now that we realise about, and you dig all that lot up, you can't put them back. It takes 50, 60 years to get it all back. We now realise what all this is about. So dig up the nature. You don't put it back. It's actually irreplaceable. So that's why all that ecology is rather important. And I'm not giving people lectures on it, but it was one of the reasons why we're rather touchy about it. I'm not going to go on about all the other stuff that's been done to death in this. I support this application. I think that social housing is extremely important, but the sensitivity around the edges to the stuff that we're talking about is not optional. It's important that we do it. Could you comment on the bits I've just made, if you would, please?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I was actually nodding whilst you were speaking there, to be honest. I think we have had the balance between ecology, drainage and landscape at the heart of the discussions, quite honestly. And I think we're almost there, but we're still not 100% satisfied with their landscaping details because of those finer details. We've had discussions around deciduous against evergreen in terms of managing runoff, what sort of species mix in terms of the native, non-native. So if you have a look on page 52, recommended condition 10 does say, notwithstanding your landscaping proposal, which is pretty good, there are a few little bits of details that we're not happy with, and that does talk about the detailed species for the rain gardens, specifically because there's not enough native species within that from an ecology point of view, and because we haven't quite dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's on the sustainable drainage. So we've got a bit of wriggle room with that separate consenting process to make sure that the schemes do come together. But broadly speaking, the layout is almost there. But I take your point. It's sometimes the finer detail which planning overlooks because we're looking at higher level bits and pieces. But I think on this site we have looked at that in detail, and you'll see the tree officer's comments on the condition of the TPO'd ash tree. We're aware that's not got much life left into it, so we're trying to get ahead of that by getting proper replacement planting as part of this scheme to compensate for the inevitable eventuality where that scheme would be lost anyway through disease.
Thank you, Claire. You all right, Stuart? You are muted. I can see you're saying something.
Yeah, Councillor Jeremiah has had me up round there a few times. I can't remember the planning visit, but certainly the things he's concerned about up there, because it is extremely steep up there. And I get that on the ecology up there is that it holds everything in around there, and it's important that we get it right. And to actually have stuff that's native to that area, I think, it's principle throughout the borough, but certainly up there, the stuff that exists there, is important that we go for that. Thank you very much for that, Claire.
Right, thank you. Next, Veronica.
Thank you, Chair. I was just hunting through. I'm sure I recall seeing something about the possibility of a 20-mile-per-hour car restriction, speed restriction being considered. Is that a possibility? Because increasingly elsewhere outside of our borough that is being put in, and it does seem that people generally are agreeing now that this does have an impact in terms of road safety. And it would seem to me, perhaps given the nature of that area, this would be an ideal place to consider putting it in. If Paul could answer on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. And it's near a school, isn't it, Veronica? Yeah. Paul, would you like to come in with that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't know whether members probably are aware that Welsh Government are considering a blanket 20-mile-an-hour zone in all areas throughout Wales. What we try and tend to do is, like I said, we look for mitigation front in the site. We did look at traffic calming along the site, which generally when we do that is to try and get the speeds down to about 20 mile an hour in any event. So what we try and do is design something along the frontage of the site that would reduce traffic speeds to around about 20 mile an hour. And then, of course, if this blanket speed limit comes in, well, that's something that we need to deal with as and when then. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Right, is there anyone else now would like to ask a question or comment on it? No? Who are you coming in? I can't see you wanting to speak, but
No, I'm still here, Chair. If my hand is still up, it shouldn't be. It was when I raised my questions before.
no. Okay, thank you. Right.
Sorry, Chair, can I just step in? My computer, I got 29 seconds left, and it's going to restart for an application update. So I'll have to. It's going to happen because I can't stop it, and then I'll jump straight back in as soon as it's finished.
Yes. Okay, Gaynor. Thank you for telling us.
Okay.
Right. Right. If there's no more questions or comments on this application, would someone like to make a proposal? Move a proposal?
I'll move, Chair.
Thank you, Jason. Is there a seconder? Janet?
No. I would make an amendment that the application is deferred until highway safety have worked with the residents and the ward councillors before construction starts to mitigate the safety aspects for the school children and the parking issues.
Well, I think that's been looked into. Would the highways officer comment on that?
Yeah. What we can do is we can normally put planning conditions on a consent, something like traffic or works are to be in place prior to development of such and such. But it's awful difficult. Like say we put in a traffic calming scheme, we would consult residents automatically as a part of the proposal. So say we come to agreement on the amount of money that was available, which it could be for discussion, for negotiation. So we would need to do that in the first instance. Secondly, then we would have to design up a scheme, and then we would have to consult residents and implement that scheme. So that's normally part of the process. And what we do as well is it can take a long time to implement a scheme and to agree a scheme. So what we would normally do is say we got some agreement on the amount of money, we got agreement on the scheme that was going to go ahead. We got agreement with local members, we consulted residents, everybody was happy with that scheme. To get to that stage takes a long time, and you never normally say this shall be in place prior to any development taking place, simply because it takes a heck of a long time to get that in place. So what we normally do is we normally say that it should be in place prior to the end of the latter end of the development, because you can have development going ahead and houses being built, and you get the traffic associated with that. But in tandem, what we normally do then is we work up the scheme and design up the scheme and get the consents for it while our development is going ahead. But members then can be safe in the knowledge, really, that a scheme will be there, but it's normally at the latter end of the development, and it never really is before in the first instance, because it takes such a long time to get a scheme agreed. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. Will you accept that, Janet? Thank you.
Yeah.
Claire Hall, did you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. I was going to come in, but I deferred now to Richard, who's going to make the same point that I was going to make. So I'll hand to him.
Okay then, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to clarify the conversation earlier. Councillor Bevan raised the issue of what Claire meant in the report about the enhanced highways contribution. As the report stands at the moment, as the recommendation stands, in compliance with the contribution supplementary planning guidance, we are recommending £20,000 goes towards traffic calming, and then there's a split between recreation, adult recreation and children's recreation. If members felt that they wanted more money to be put towards highway works, then we could do that, because as long as the overall balance doesn't change in terms of the 106, we could look at that money and apportion it more towards highways to get a more enhanced scheme than what 20,000 would buy. So if members wanted, because there's no schemes designed up, it'd be very difficult to say, let's pull another 20,000 towards highways, because we don't know what the scheme will look like. But if members were interested and willing to do this, if members were minded to approve it, part of that could be to give us as officers delegated powers to look at the traffic calming and decide whether to put, or how much more money to put to that, to do a proper highway improvement scheme there, or a traffic calming scheme there. And we would be happy to do that in consultation with the local member. So if the members wanted to do that, they'd have to include that in their motion. If not, then as the recommendation stands, the apportionment is as set out in the heads of terms. I hope that's clear, but if any members want any questions on that, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Richard. Right, Hugh Bevan, you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, I have. Thank you, Chair. It's picking up on the point that Richard just made now. He's kind of preempted it a little bit, and Janet raised it as well. And it's to do with his £20,000 contribution. And as the report mentioned, the possibility for that being enhanced. Claire said that hadn't been fully decided on in terms of how much was going towards recreational facilities on the nearby for highways, and I fully take on board and accept Richard's comments and suggestions, and I would be happy to support that. I'm in the planning committee now. We have to take a decision as to whether to defer this item today and bring it back to a future planning committee meeting with once these enhancements have been fully explored in terms of the traffic calming and highway safety measure, leisure and recreation facilities, for members to be able to fully explore them and debate them in more detail. Or the second option is, as Richard has alluded to, in that we vote today to approve the scheme in principle with conditions, but put the amended motion through to give him delegated powers to be able to undertake that work, as he said, after he's undertaken the consultation with local. As far as I can see, we've got two options here. Should members wish to go down that route, or the third option would be just to approve the report as it stands. But I think the debate that we've had today, I sense that there is perhaps a feeling that we either undertake a further review once we know fully exactly what the proposed conditions would be, or we vote today to agree to delegate that to Richard. So can somebody give me some advice and guidance on that?
May I come back? Yeah. Just on that point, I suppose my recommendation would be that you allow us to negotiate that, simply because that would be part of the Section 106 negotiations. We've got to take account of the highways issues, but we've also got to take account of the recreation issues as well. If you gave us delegated powers, that allows us to do the liaison necessary with the local member. The problem about deferring it and making us go away to do that, I don't know how long that would take, and my concern would be the grant that's going to be payable for the scheme, the funding for the scheme, may be jeopardised if that view is taken. So the problem is the time it may take to come to that decision on a scheme may take longer than the funding would allow.
Chair.
Yeah.
I put my hand up. As Jason's moved this, is Jason prepared for us to do what Richard suggested?
Yes,
and I'll second that.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. There's another speaker. Gwyn wants to come in.
Sorry.
Do it before we.
Yeah, okay. I didn't see it on there.
Right, thank you, Chair. I've been a bit quiet. I've been listening to all the arguments. I know this road very well, and I know the area very well. Obviously, I deliver to the school children, and the amount of traffic and the amount of parking in this area, and that school have been up there a good few years now, and nothing has been done to slow the traffic down. So what makes us all think that suddenly they're going to put a few more houses up and this traffic calming idea is going to come into the area? Traffic calming should have been in there when they opened the school, because where that young lad died, that road there is dreadful. And I do it with a 40-foot coach twice a day, and people drive it on cars, and it's the same thing with cars. The amount of parking, the amount of traffic up there, I think they should be deferred until the traffic calming has been put into place, and then we can have a look at it. And this is another area now, which I've said in the past, we should have a site visit and have a look at it. And it's all right saying we can't have site visits. Yes, we can have site visits, 2 meters apart, all go up in different cars, and we can have a look at this area, because I think that it's the same old state now, where down south and up north it was built for tram roads. I've said this in the past. Cumbran is a new area. It's got all the facilities down there. All the roads are fairly good. And I think that up this area, we need site visits. And yes, I'll agree that traffic calming is wanted on this site, but I think it should have been done years ago. But if this could be deferred until the traffic calming ideas come in, I think I will go for it. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you, Gwyn. Do you want to comment again, Richard? Or leave it as if Jason will accept you having delegated powers, or officers having delegated powers added to his motion? Would that be acceptable?
Yeah, I'd be happy with that, Chair.
Chair, I'd like to say, Gwyn, we've been up there already, some of us on the planning committee. I totally agree with no one else as well. Totally agree with you about that road, and quite happy to leave the officers to come back with a thing. It's a horrible road.
Yes, it's dangerous.
Yeah, we've been up there.
Yeah.
A lot of us.
Somebody is asked to come in. Who wants to speak again?
Polly wants to come in, Chair.
Polly.
Oh, Polly, is it? Yeah. Yes, please, Polly.
Thank you, Councillor Parish. I was just to clarify, when Richard is talking about delegated powers, are we saying that what we will do is take a complete contribution from the developer? So you add all of the money together to create one pot, and then depending on how much the scheme for the road enhancement costs, we allocate money out of that pot to that scheme. And then if there's any money left over, then that goes to children's open space, play and adult recreation. Is that what you were proposing, Richard, just to clarify?
Yeah, sorry, Chair, if I can come back in there. Yes. I think what I was saying is that we've set out 3 separate payments there at the moment. Added together, they make quite a substantial pot. We can't lose sight of the fact that money needs to really go towards play provision as well. And I think what my suggestion was is that if you were able to give us delegated powers to do that negotiation, we would do it on the basis of what sort of scheme can we provide in terms of traffic calming. What would we need to provide for the children's play, and anything left for the adults provision as well. So it just gives us that ability, taking all 3 issues into account, really, not really concentrate on one rather than the other. Although highways, I think, is extremely important to look at first of all, but also to try and spread that money so we try and get the best of all those worlds. Is that?
So what we're asking for is, rather than it to be a tight money allocated for this, money allocated for that, money allocated for something else, is to have a more flexible approach in the recommendation to allow you to, if the highway improvements cost slightly more than £20,000, you would have the flexibility within the Section 106 agreement to allocate that money to the highway improvements.
Yeah, my belief would be that the children's play is quite important, and I think that there may be some flexibility with the adult recreation, but what we'd like to do is involve the local ward member in those deliberations as we negotiate with the applicant.
This is very reasonable, actually.
Yes, yeah, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Polly. Right. We all know now what's going to be expected. So can we have a vote on it now? Are you ready to vote? It's been moved, and Stuart, you seconded it.
Yeah.
So everybody ready to vote on it? Geraint, can I ask you again?
Chair, can you say the motion again, please? Sorry to interrupt.
Well, it's the motion as the officer's recommendation with the delegated powers, with the conditions that Polly and Richard have just explained to us.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Richard?
Yeah.
Yeah? Right. Geraint, could I ask you in alphabetical order again to ask members how they're voting for, against or abstaining?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I can start with Councillor Ashley, please.
For.
Councillor Bevan.
For.
Councillor Constance.
Against.
Councillor Crick.
For.
Councillor Evans.
For.
Councillor Hawler.
Against.
Councillor James.
For.
Councillor Jenkins.
Against.
Councillor Faye Jones.
For.
Councillor Janet Jones.
Against.
Councillor O'Connell.
For.
Councillor Parish.
For.
And Councillor Thomas.
Against.
That's 8 for and 5 against, Chair.
Right, thank you, Geraint. This application has been approved. Right, before we go on to the next application, can I ask if Councillor Dave Thomas has left the meeting? Geraint, do you know if he's left? Because he gave a prejudicial declaration of interest.
Bear with me a sec, Chair. I'll just double check the participants.
Thank you.
Yeah, he's left, Chair.
Thank you. Right. Agenda item 5, planning application 20/P/0481 FUL. The change of use of approximately 27 square metres of existing office space into A3 takeaway at Full Circle House, Lakeside Park, Plantarnum, Cwmbran. Right. Have all members now received an email? And do you want to have 5 minutes to look through the conditions, suggested conditions?
I had it in the post, Chair.
Pardon? Yes, I had one in the
I received it in the post.
Yes,
And I
some
did, Chair.
they
So
have
did I.
a site.
Yeah,
So-
I didn't. It came with the old one, yeah.
Yes, yeah. I can't hear you, Stuart. You're saying something, but I can't hear you.
I discovered it eventually. Sorry about that. I know where it is now.
So all members now have had sight of the
Yeah,
conditions.
I've read it, by the way.
Well, I'll ask Rebecca McAndrew, Principal Planner, to present the report now. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair.
Members will recall that we reported this application for a pizza parlour to the last committee in November the 17th. Members resolved to approve the application subject to conditions, and officers, it was agreed officers would go away and draft some conditions for you to consider at this committee. There's 6 conditions proposed. 3 of them are, well, a couple of them are quite standard conditions, such as the details of the approved plans and time limits for implementation. Then we've got a condition requiring details of litter bin provision in the area of the site. A condition relating to the provision of parking for the proposed use. Details of external works, just to confirm exactly where the door to access the facility would be. And then a condition restriction the use of the unit or the area to hot food takeaway only. So that's the conditions that we're proposing. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Are there any questions or comments before we take a vote? I can't see anyone coming in. No? Would someone like to move it?
I'll move
Yes,
it,
Chair.
Chair.
Right, is there a seconder?
Yes, Chair.
Right, thank you. Right, Get back. I'm going to have to ask you again to please ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they are for, against or abstaining.
Thank you, Chair. If I can start with Councillor Ashley, please.
For.
Councillor Bevan.
For.
Councillor Constance.
For.
Councillor Crick.
For.
Councillor Evans.
For.
Councillor Hawler.
For.
Councillor James.
For.
Councillor Jenkins.
For.
Councillor Faye Jones.
For.
Councillor Janet Jones.
For.
Councillor O'Connell.
For.
And Councillor Parish.
For.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Yes, it's 12 for. That is unanimous. The suggested condition has been approved. Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending this meeting and on your contributions. I would like to wish you all a happy and healthy Christmas and hope 2021 will bring us all what we wish for. I'll now close the meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Bye.